Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I grew up in the FLDS community. It is a polygamous group run by Warren Jeffs, which I moved out of when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for almost 8 years now and have two beautiful babies together.
Yes, we do. And today we are super excited to welcome a special guest, Shannon.
We are so very excited for this. She was one of the very first CPS agents to be on the scene for the Texas raid. And I know a lot of you who have started following us after we did our reviews of Keep, Sweet, Pray, and Obey have heard us say this many a times, that we always felt like there was more to the story, right?
There always is.
There always is two sides to every story. And we're so excited to be able to hear this side of it, because so often we see in these documentaries, you know, people went in and then the parents and the kids were ripped away from the parents. And it's like there had to have been a lot of stuff in between. And so we are so excited to be able to share that with you and show this side of everything. So we'd like y'all to welcome. Here is Shannon with us.
Welcome, Shannon. So happy to have you here with us today.
Mm-hmm. And we're so grateful that you were brave enough to come and tell this story, because I mean, I obviously know this is going to bring up, I'm sure, a lot of hard memories and things for you. And so we just really appreciate you being willing to be open with us and let us know, because we just really want people to see both sides of everything. And a lot of these documentaries, I just feel like don't give fair justice to that side. And
Yeah, I know that just watching on the news what was happening, it was easy to just quickly, I mean, these were people I knew, so it was difficult for me to see it happen. But of course, I'm starting to realize I knew very little, even though I was a part of the FLDS group and a part of the people that were in Texas and at the ranch there. It was so I didn't know very much about what was going on. So I'm very, very happy to have you shed some light on this for me and for everyone else that is curious.
Yeah, and for anybody else that would like to continue to know more about what it was like for Sam to grow up in polygamy, please like and subscribe. If you want to donate to our cause of creating more compassion for these communities and helping us empower people to share their stories, not only people that grew up in polygamy, but people like Shannon who are willing to stand up and share their stories of things that influence and impacted these polygamous communities, then you can click donate below or go to our brand new website of growingupinpolygamy.com and donate there as well. So we will get right into it.
Yeah, let's get right into it. So Shannon, to start off with, how much did you know about the FLDS community before you were involved with this Texas raid?
Absolutely nothing.
Really?
Like zero knowledge. So
did you live far from the ranch there in Texas, or?
I currently live where I lived back then. I've actually moved back to where I was. So I'm like an hour and a half away from there. So it kind of fell into our jurisdiction of Region 2. Region 2 would encompass like Central Texas, North Texas. Basically, I don't know if you're familiar with Texas geography, but
a little bit.
There's Dallas, and that's out of my jurisdiction. But we go, you know, to the west, right? The west. The way you go to the west, and so El Dorado fell into that area.
Okay, and then had you heard about? You know, a lot of people have said in these other documentaries, the fact that they had heard that there was going to be like a hunting retreat or something, like that there was talk in the town about what was happening in El Dorado.
What that big temple was all about.
The big temple, or that this big building was. Mm-hmm. Was that even on your radar? I feel like being an hour and a half away, it could have just not even been something that anyone would talk about.
So on these documentaries, the thing you have to remember about El Dorado, Texas, is that it's like a town of like 300 people. They don't even have a grocery store. So there's no one knew what was going on unless you lived in El Dorado. So anyone outside of, we had no idea. Like no one knew anywhere in Texas knew that was going on. I mean, maybe I can't speak for all Texas citizens, but like I said, that town was like 300 people. So maybe like the people, I remember there was barely a grocery store.
Wow.
Like, there was no, I mean, it's probably jumping too far ahead, but there's nowhere for even us to get food at that time while we were there. It's what you call a food desert, even, if you will.
Yeah, that's something no one talks about. I feel like, I mean, you always hear it's a small town, but like not that small.
I didn't know it was that small.
It's tiny. So, I have some other stuff to say about that. That town's amazing. That town's amazing. I'll say that much. What they did for us there.
Oh, good. That's good. And that, I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense because Warren Jeffs, of course, would have wanted to be out of the out of the way of big cities and things like that, so that people weren't always around. So it makes sense.
But he would find somewhere that remote.
Small.
There's no way. Like where I live right now, it's like 20, maybe 15,000 people. They wouldn't have let him come. Like it just wouldn't have. It just would not have happened. And I think when I watch these documentaries and things, I think that probably they were like, "Oh man, this hunting lodge that's going to bring executives here. They're going to do all this stuff. Like, of course, like come in. Like, why wouldn't they? A small town, they're seeing all like, oh, these guys are going to come in and spend money that we haven't seen. Maybe they see in a year,
right?
From one of their visits. So I think that's probably why they were like, absolutely. And who are the FLDS? Who are even the Mormons? Like we don't. Or I think to be respectful, I think it's Latter-day Saints now, right? It's Latter-day Saints. So I know a lot more now. But,
I'm sure.
So we don't even like. I think there's one Mormon meeting house here. Yeah, like it's just not a thing. Like
it's not Utah then.
Not familiar with that culture at all, let alone fundamentalists of it.
Oh no, absolutely not. I said zero. I had no idea there was some kind of temple being built, a lodge. There's nothing.
Yeah. So the town itself, obviously, very very small town, as you've just mentioned. Was the ranch, the FLDS ranch, was that a ways away from the town as well, or was that right there next to the rest of the people?
I remember it's been, like I said, some years ago, and eyewitness testimony isn't always 100, it degrades over time. Right. But I want to say it was like some miles away from the main town, because we went down like some roads and they churned and like, it was so secretive where they were taking us. And I remember just kind of pulling up and being like, oh my gosh, like we're at so it had to be a little away from El Dorado. So
can you speak of what your first the call, I guess, to go to the ranch there? What was that like for you, or where did the information come from? What was your first interaction with anything to do with this?
And I guess also, what was your position? Like, I know I mentioned that you were an agent, but this probably doesn't do it justice. Like, what was your position? And then, how you initially heard about or were called onto that job?
So I first started as a conservatorship worker, which is someone who is working with families that recently had children removed. And I moved into an investigator position. So that's what I was at the time, was an investigator 4. That's like the initial responder. So it goes in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're a supervisor. So I was at a 4. So I was, I guess you could say, one of the higher ranked people. I was only 21 when I started. So by then I'm like 24 years old. I'm 39 now. So like, I still had rose-colored glasses on for a lot of things. So at that age.
And how did they? Sorry. That's what I was gonna say. Is just how did they come to call you, or what did that call come in like?
Okay, so I still didn't know anything about it. So I'm there, and they had just recently hired some investigators that were police officers also. So they were serving in a dual function. Like they were able to take evidence in ways that CPS can't. Like for instance, let's say there's an injury to a child, and sometimes we could mess up criminal proceedings and not mean to. So having that police officer that was also a CPS caseworker was, beneficial to not mess up physical evidence. So all I knew was that the one that was positioned in my office, she was off on some secret mission, right? Mm-hmm. So a few days go by and they're like, Shannon, hey, we need you to go for 3 or 4 days down to this place called El Dorado, Texas. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? They're like, it's top secret. You're just going to get a rental car and you're going to go. And they're like, I'm like, well, what do I take with me? And they're like, take dresses, don't wear red, bring batteries, and bring a microphone. I'm very serious. They said, bring a lot of pens and paper. And I'm like, okay, why not? Sounds like an adventure. So I actually get in the car and drive to El Dorado. And I'm like, oh, where am I going? And then I show up at an address, and then someone picks me up in a white car. Like it's very, it's very weird. So that's how that even started. And I just kind of roll up on scene. Yeah.
And so it wasn't something that they were really sharing much about around your office. I mean, seems like it was very secretive.
Yeah, I remember too, cell phones were not in 2005. Cell phones were, or what year was that? 2008? Cell phones were not what they are now. True. So it's not like my coworker was like, girl, I am in some, like,
they're not like FaceTiming you being like, you're not going to believe this.
Like, we had flip phones that worked sometimes, and like, it just wasn't the same. Like, it's not like I was able to be like living it. Oh, I'm Jewish, by the way. Just random side note. I was like, people ask. So yeah, so that's part of it too, is I had no contact with my coworker. There's no cell reception out there. So that's how I even ended up out there. And I met up with some coworkers, and they were like, hey, what's up? And I'm like, hey, what's going on? And then it starts from there, essentially.
Wow.
So it's interesting that they already had like some cultural things where they were like, wear dresses, don't wear red, right? Because you're probably like, what is that about?
I'm like, first of all, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Because that's who I am as an individual. I was like, I'm not wearing dresses. I don't wear them regularly. Like, part of it, doing an investigation or interviewing, as you guys interview people all the time, is like, you need to be comfortable with how you are. And
Right.
so if I show up in a dress, like, I'm gonna be like, what? I later found out the reasons why for this, and they only said women are the only ones that can go. No male investigators were allowed to go. And
it actually makes sense.
It does. Looking back, I'm like, I know exactly why it was that way at that time. At the time, I was like, what? This is like the weirdest thing I've ever heard. But so I didn't wear a dress, and they were like, can you just conform with it? I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not comfortable. I mean, and I'm glad I didn't. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't wear red, but I'm glad I didn't.
Well, at least
happy
be
medium.
comfortable. I mean, I feel it was important for you to be yourself and be comfortable. So I mean,
and in my religion, no one tells me what to dress like. I mean, I know, like, that's something I didn't know at that time, but I know now that they were trying to even control us before we even got entry in. That's something I know now. So
I was going to ask that. Was that something that like the police force or the CPS asked of you, or was it something that they had been asked of by the FLDS leaders?
So this is hearsay, right? Okay, I can't back this up, but this was told to me by my supervisors when I go out there. Her name's Angie Voss. That's all over the internet. You can look that up. She was like a program manager at the time. She got slammed in a lot of bad criticism for what happened. But anyway, nice, wonderful lady. But she told me, that this is what I need to do. And I was like, I don't know. It wasn't going to do it. So, but yeah, the people at the YFZ, I forget, I don't know all their names. I've heard Sam say the names a lot, but I don't know the names because I just didn't really care.
Right.
I was like, look, Uncle so-and-so, like, you, like, move on. But like, this was Uncle I remember, because I remember seeing him at the gate, and he was the one that had made this agreement that we could come in if the women were wearing dresses, and it was women only. And this was like the head guy that was down there at the time that was negotiating.
Was it Merrill?
It might be Merrill. That sounds really familiar.
Yes, I know he was a big part of it down there. So they did refer to the leaders as Uncle. Yeah. So that
guy was Uncle somebody. And I was like, I'm not calling him that.
We don't blame you for not being able to remember names after all this time. By the way, we completely understand that. Like, this was still a long time ago. So if you can't remember,
he was wearing jeans and a long sleeve shirt, and he was on the fence waiting, like, to see who we were. Were women getting out of the vehicle? Things like that. I remember seeing my supervisor out there, Angie Voss, and she had her whole dress on her, and I was like, man, but that got her talking to this guy, like, to where he was willing to talk to her to negotiate that entry.
Did it CPS? So originally, the police originally went in because of the call that was made. At what point did they just, like, how long had that, or I guess how long had it been between the cops going in to begin with and then the call for anybody from CPS to go in?
I don't know, because I didn't know about any. I know that I know from policy that a CPS investigation has to be triggered by a report.
Okay.
That's what I know. So I knew there had to have been a report, but I didn't know anything about. They said the only thing I remember being told was some girl called the hotline and said this and that. We don't really think there's much to it, but we're obligated to investigate.
Okay.
That's what I was told at the time.
And that kind of report, because it had to do with a child, automatically would have CPS come.
There's P1 and P2. So P1 being high priority. And anytime there's sexual abuse of a child actively going on, that's going to generate a priority 1 investigation. So they have 24 hours to respond to that. So I don't know anything about the law enforcement aspect of it. I just know the CPS side of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I can't really speak to that.
Right. That makes sense. I'm curious. So did you go out there, and were you and these other women out there in the ranch for a while before? In the show, it shows these buses showing up to pick up the women and children.
That's way later.
That was way later.
Weeks,
and that's kind of what we felt
multiple weeks later.
Okay.
Weeks later.
See, the show, the documentary didn't make it seem like it was that much later.
Right? It's like we showed up in buses and we're like,
yeah, like, get in here, let's go. So you were there investigating for
no.
quite some time then before that.
Yes.
We should rewind and go back to, so the first time that you went into the ranch, what was your first impression, and what was the first thing that you were sent in there to do?
So they loaded me in the car and said, we're here to investigate sexual abuse of children. Very typical investigation, very typical interview. Something I did probably 4, 5, 6 times a week. I wasn't really worried about it until we pulled up to the opening of the facility. So we pull up to we come up in this vehicle. There's like me and 3 other women there. I'm not for this whole ranch. And I didn't know at the time really what it was. But we pull up and there's like military tanks behind the gates. And we have snipers, like I don't know if they're like what do you call it, like the state guard, or I don't know if it's military. I don't know. I just remember being like, oh my
God,
National Guard here.
Yeah.
I don't know. So there's 2 tanks, there's 2 snipers behind rocks, and I have paper. Okay, and and they're like, oh, they're here. I remember her talking to, I think he said it was probably I forget, he said Meryl. He said it was probably Meryl. Her talking to Meryl, we get out of the car and she's like, there they are. And then we get out and I'm looking around, I'm like, why are there tanks? Like what are we doing? Like, I still don't know at this point. So I walk up and I look at him and I offer to shake his hand. He doesn't shake my hand. I remember being very tall. I remember I'm like, hi. And he's like, anyways. And
oh, wow.
So they opened the gates and like everyone's like, I'm looking around like, what is going on? And I find out that some guy's like, oh, we're worried this is going to turn into another Waco. I'm like, what? Like, I'm like, what are we doing? And then they're like, okay, proceed through. And they're like, don't take any pictures, don't take any photographs, don't do any of that. So me, in the same way that I didn't wear a dress, I also took photos. And then I was like, look at that temple. Like, what is that? Like, I've never even seen a Mormon temple at this point. So to me, I'm just like, this is this giant white structure in the middle of nowhere. So we're told we're not allowed to go near the temple because we'll desecrate it, you know. And I'm like, okay, whatever, that's fine. You're allowed your religious beliefs, and I believe that. You know, I believe that whatever you choose to believe is what you believe, as long as it doesn't harm others or this sort of thing. So I'm like, I don't care. I think that's probably one of the reasons I even got picked to go out there, is because I actually have a degree in religious studies.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, you know, whatever, like, this is their religion. If they believe this, like, whatever, it doesn't really matter to me. So I'm just open to talking to these people. So we're going along in this circle around the ranch, and they pull us up to like, and I'm seeing like log cabins, like those Lincoln log cabins. And I'm like, what is this? Like, it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. And then we pull up to one house, and they're like, all right, get out and go investigate. And I'm like, what? Because this is kind of going against like our regular policies that we have. So, it's kind of, I don't know. It's like, first of all, you know, you want to go into the door and they have to allow you into the home. The people that own the home have to allow you in. Okay. And this is, I mean, I guess I'm probably skipping ahead, but this is one of the reasons that the children were returned. So I go up and I'm like thinking to myself, this is not procedure, you know? And I'm like going up, I knock on the door, and this young looking woman, I mean, she's maybe 18, 19 years old in my eyes. I've seen a lot of kids at this point. And I'm like, hi, I'm with CPS. Can I come in? I'm in by myself, by the way, in this house. They sent the other 2 investigators off to like other log cabins.
That's surprising.
They just left me out there. Like, I almost died. Like, these people had snipers on top of the different houses and things. I could see them crouched up there with their binoculars and their guns.
Wow. Did that give you some kind of, did that give you some level of fear? I mean, seeing all of these snipers and I can imagine. I bet that was terrifying to walk into one of these unknown homes with all of these snipers and tanks around by yourself.
Yeah, the snipers weren't with us. They were with the FLDS.
Oh, the snipers were with the FLDS?
I don't know if they had snipers, but they had guns of some sort with binoculars, and they're on top of the different buildings. I don't know what. Now I think I know that they were like little factories and things that maybe they had out there. But they were on top of it. I could see them, and I was like, oh my, like looking around, like, what is this?
I thought you were talking about the National Guard that whole time. When you said snipers, I thought you were talking about the National Guard had snipers to protect you.
There were some on our side, but we left them at the gate. Yeah, so like when I say I have a little bit of trauma from doing this, like I don't know, I just have some anxiety like going on in my life.
I can't even imagine. So. And also, sorry to I don't want to stop your progression of the story, but also when you say that it goes against the typical procedure, can you run us through what a typical procedure, like if you were going to a regular home and there's been a report of child abuse, just quickly, what would that procedure kind of look for? Like if you were going to go interview a child in a regular home?
So let's say I approach your house. I'm like, I knock on the door, you answer it, right? I'm like, hi, are you Miss So-and-so? I'm Shannon with Child Protective Services. I've got a report about this and that. Is it okay if I come into your home? At that time, you're like, yes. Okay. There I have your consent, just like, we have constitutional rights, and that falls under the thing where you have to invite these people in. They have the right to say no also. And at that time, okay, we have to file a motion with the judge to enter. Oh. So in hindsight, I kind of think they planned all that. In my opinion. I think, because I remember thinking so I go up to the door and she's like, hi, come in. You know what I mean? Like I never asked permission for entry. I didn't I didn't identify myself. I'm just looking around like okay. Like apparently we have permission. To go in. I mean, for me, this was like every day going into unknown homes, talking to unknown people. I mean, I went in dangerous situations all the time by myself. So that part seemed very normal. I was just like, okay, like I'm going in hindsight, like there's so many things that I think that we really got played on. And they had been briefed, I feel, about just open the door, let them walk in, stuff like that I like. Their kindness kind of oh, okay, yeah, I'll come in. Yeah. I know now, which is like keep sweet, right? So that's what that stuff was.
Yeah, I wonder if part of it was also to try to make it seem like they weren't trying to hide anything. Just to make 100%. It seem like, oh, no problem, anyone can come in, no big deal. I wonder if that was part of it as well.
I think so, because I think so, because I busted her in lies like left, right. I mean, it was just going on, and it was just natural stuff I was used to from working with regular everyday people. It's very easy. Like if you just let someone in your home and you don't proof it before they come in, there's so many indicators about you and your life. Like it just is like, do you have a tennis racket in the corner so you play tennis? Or you're just little things like this. Yeah. So I walk in and she's like, come in. And I'm like sitting down. I'm like, we do our basic like intro biography type questions, like, where are you? How old are you? Where are you from? What's your birthday? How many children do you have? Are you single, married, divorced? This type of thing. And she's like, well, I'm a single mom. I have 2 kids, she's like, I'm 19. And I'm looking at, there's 2 little boys playing. And I'm like, that boy's 4. That boy's 3. And I'm in my head like, I guess, like this, like the math, counting back. And I'm like, okay, so if you're 19, then that means your youngest child was born when you were 17. So this one had to have been born when you were 15. You know what I mean? Like I'm in my head, like this is weird, which isn't unusual in the community. You'll see young mothers like this. Like that's not unusual. So I'm still like, okay, like who's the father? That's the next question, because we're required by law to notify the fathers that there's an investigation, because equal rights, right? I mean, because if their children are there under investigation, keep in mind, I still don't know anything about the FLDS. I'm just doing a regular investigation. Right. She's like, oh, he doesn't come here. He doesn't live here. And I'm like, I'm looking around. I see these enormous work boots in the corner, all dirty. They're like construction boots. I'm like, whose boots are those? And she's like, I can just see her go like, ooh. And I'm like, I don't think you're 18, by the way, or I don't think you. She's like, well, I'm actually 21, because I can see her trying to do math for the kids' age. I can see it because I know how old kids are. generally speaking. I'm like, that kid's talking, that kid's like, so he's like, actually, I'm 22. And I'm like, I'm like, I don't believe you. Like, and then all of a sudden the guy comes in, and I remember he was one of the guys that got arrested. I know that. He was like an older guy. He was like his 50s, 60s. And I'm looking at this guy and I'm like, who is this? And he walks in and she's like, okay, this is the father. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, he sits down. He's real nice to me, actually, and talks to me. And I say, and then my supervisor, the program manager, Angie Voss, just comes in, and she's like, what do you think? Because she doesn't have any experience in the field. She's a desk jockey, essentially. Yeah. She's like, what do you think? Do you think this girl's under 18? This is one of my most shameful memories that I have, honestly. And I tell people about it, but it's shameful to me in a way because I just feel bad about it. But I'm like, I don't think this girl's 18. I just don't think she is. So I remove her and put her, and I tell her, you know what, like, let's go ahead. Cause they told me, like, if I see something or, let's go. So I ask her and I'm like, what do you think? Like, and she's like, let's go. If you think this kid, this woman is not who she says she is, like, tell her we need to go for an interview and we're going to treat her like a child. Well, she turns out to be like 18, 19 years old, and took this like a basically adult and put her into like foster care. Like, I feel like I imprisoned her. You know what I mean? So, but at the same time, I tell myself, like, she wouldn't give me her birthday. She wouldn't give me her identification. The husband wouldn't get it. He wouldn't give it to me. And so, and then when I said, well, okay, like, if you can't prove how old you are, like, you're going to have to come with me, because I will not leave you here with these 2 children and this old man. Like, I'm not going to do it. I won't. Right. And so I did that. And so he says, well, go ahead and go. And she says, and I remember thinking, this is when I noticed things are starting to really get funky. And she goes, yes, sir. And I'm like, this is supposed to be like your husband? Did you just say yes, sir? I was thinking, how weird. And I skipped some parts, but there's also a big picture of Warren Jeffs in the background and on the pillows. Cool. That was weird to me too. I was like, y'all sleep on his face?
Oh, on the pillows?
That's weird. Yeah, it was on the pillows. Now I remember thinking, y'all sleep on his face? How weird. I remember thinking, but anyway.
Wow.
I remember seeing that picture of him and like, oh.
Was there only that one family in there when you walked in to that house? Or how many families were there? So there's just one in that one.
Woman with 2 children.
Okay, so at that time, you had no idea the scope of how many. Did they have any idea, or did they tell you how many interviews or how many people or women you were going to be dealing with?
No, they were hiding them. They were hiding majority. I think they paraded some into houses for us in hindsight. Like, I'm almost positive they did, because it was weird, because we went house to house and we were like, well, there's like 8 kids here. Like, why are you bringing us all out here? And so I'm thinking to myself, like, this is weird, and I'm like, okay, there's definitely some weird stuff, but I don't really know, like, my spidey senses are like, they're tingling. Oh, yeah. And I'm like, this is weird. And so anyway, we ended up loading her into the car, and she ends up being one of the ones that actually like she wanted out, apparently. So
she wanted out of the community.
Apparently she did, because she ended up interviewing and just spilling the beans.
Oh.
And so whenever you hear about like, oh, there was one that, came forward, that was her.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of put that as my redeeming factor of the whole fact that I took an adult and forced her into a vehicle is that she was interviewed, and then her husband was one of the ones in prison. Like, if I were to look it up right now,
you saved her. You saved her. That's incredible. And I mean, I know that the law looks at an 18-year-old as an adult as well, but I can guarantee you ask any parent how they feel about their 18-year-old and whether or not, I mean, so I get that legally, that might be a little hard knowing that you grabbed an adult, but at the end of the day, like you said, compared to her husband's age and the fact that she wanted to get out, that's incredible.
Well, and not to mention the fact that she wouldn't tell you her birth date and show you any documents. So how could you know without that proof? So, I mean, I feel that you did what you felt was the right thing to do at the time.
Absolutely.
I did. Is just kind of a hard, like, removing kids and stuff like that is incredibly hard. Like, people don't, it's not like we're like, ooh, like, let's take them. No, it's like heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. And even then I felt bad for the husband, because I could tell he obviously loved these 2 boys, and the boys obviously loved him. You know, they were like, oh, you know, father, they're hanging all over him, playing with this like they weren't afraid of him.
Yeah.
You know, at all. Like, and she seemed kind of like standoffish of him, but the boys they were just like, you know, playing on him, hugging on him, regular stuff. And I remember it was sad because he was standing there. And then like all that, that's why I say it's kind of like a weird memory for me because of that. But, so yeah, that was the first one. And then we, you know, kind of went house to house. And
sorry, real quick, when you took her, what happened? Did you guys do anything with the children, or were you able to just leave the children with their father?
Oh, we took
or were you forced to remove the kids? Okay, so when you took her, you took her and her children.
Okay.
So these weren't like removals in the sense of legal removals. Okay. These were like, you can come with me now, and we can talk, and we can see what's going on, or we can move for removal of your child, which takes legal. I can't just go in, and you can in extreme emergency. I'm talking like you walk in and see like something crazy. I mean, yeah, you can grab them and go, but it doesn't work like that. Even if there's like a huge bruise on their arm, you can't just take them. In Texas, parents have an amazing amount of rights, as they should. They should. You know, to what extent? You know, where does that line start and stop? So you know, I took her. I was like, we can go, and you can go with them. Let's go. And so that's what she chose. Well, he told her to go. I should say she didn't choose. Yeah. You know. So yeah, that was the first one when I got in there. I still, to this day, like that image haunts me of like Warren Jeffs on that wood log looking at me, like on the wall, like a picture of Jesus. Like that was some weird looking imagery, especially on the pillows, like on the couches. Just there, that weird look he has.
Yeah.
How many more houses did you go to after that? And then how many houses did because you said there was how many of you that went in?
Like 4.
4 of you. So like how many did you interview that day? And then how many like total did you as a group?
This is where I don't know if I like block trauma out, because like I remember this very specific incident. And then I remember going in to assist other workers. That's what I remember when they were doing interviews. I remember coming in and helping try to evaluate, because I was more senior amongst some of those other women that were there. And I was like, I remember thinking, I don't know. I was like, let's just start taking kids. Like, let's just start telling them, like, how old are you? Because since they weren't being they were being cooperative, but not cooperative. I was like, how old are you? Okay, these kids, these ages of these children are not matching up with what you're saying. So let's just take them. Let's tell them what we're going to tell them, and we're going to move them out of here. Because I got to where I remember I was feeling like, let's just start. If anyone looks at all suspicious, let's just err on the side of caution, because we had permission to enter all these homes and talk to all these people. So once you have that permission, or I thought we had that permission, you can do that. So that's kind of where that went.
And when you originally took them, like you said, you were taking them to interview them, right? Did you know at that point, like how long they were going to be gone? Or was it like, let's go down to the station and talk, or go down, go wherever and talk, and then we bring you back? Or at that point, did you know it was going to be a longer process before they were going to return?
The more houses we went to, I realized I was like, we need like 300 investigators. Like the more because I was like, whoa, because each child interview takes 45 minutes to an hour. At this point, I think we have like 20. And I remember thinking, this is like 3-4, we can't get them back in time. And so as kids are coming out, I'm like, this is a bigger thing than I'm equipped to handle.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was just, I was just seeing them come out, and I was like, oh my gosh, like there's that many investigators that think these women are underage. The mothers were underage, So
when you said you would take them to interview them, was this a place on the ranch somewhere that you had set up, or was this completely out of that property?
So that's one of the things about investigating with the child is we never want to interview them at home, ever, and around the parents. The parents have the right to say, I want to be in the room for the interview. They have that right in Texas. But when you do that, sometimes what if mom's the perpetrator? What if dad's the perpetrator? And they're like, looking at the kids like, don't say a word. So they go, and then I don't know where they're going. Okay, like they're just pulling up in cars and they're just going. But I know we're going to an offsite location because we're not going to interview them at the ranch.
Right.
we're just, because that's just not what we do. Like the policy, they let us interview them. We have to get them off the ranch, right? So they end up going, I don't even know where it's at now. If I had to tell you, I don't know, but it was like almost like a warehouse. And they had, it was like an open room. And then there was like a room in the back. And then there was like this long table that we had all these girls sitting at. I remember we had one girl that was pregnant and she looked about 14 years old. I remember that. That was a very obvious, like, I saw her, and you probably saw her on the news. She was like redheaded, short. She was pregnant and she was there. And I know I was like, well, that one is definitely like, there's something going on. So then like they're in these dresses, you know, and I'm like, okay, this is getting weirder and weirder. And they're like, okay, we're not going to do interviews till tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, like whatever we need to do. So I remember they got brought food and all this stuff, you know, everything that they need. I remember like there's all like 20 girls at this point sitting at a long table, and they start singing hymns, which were so creepy. I mean, it was so creepy. Me and like my 4 or 5 associates were like, what is going on? Like, I mean, they're just singing and we're like, this is the creepiest, well, pretty singing I've ever heard.
This is the prettiest, creepiest thing I've ever heard.
Wow.
Like a bad horror movie to me. Remember, I still at this time, I don't know anything about the FLDS. I don't know who Warren Jeffs is. I don't know who Joseph Smith is. I don't know. So I'm hearing all these weird names and I'm like, who are these people? Like, you know, and so I do what I've been taught to do. I try to make connections with some of the kids. So I go up to one, I'm like, hey, how are you? And she's like, don't touch me. Get away from me. I'm like, whoa, I'm so sorry. Like, and they're looking at each other like, I don't know what to do. I remember seeing one like, what do I do? And I was like, trying to talk to them like I would any other youth, you know, I was just trying to speak to them. So from there they have us build like little racks, like for them to sleep on, like cots. So I started assembling those. When I say we were like a one army, like kind of thing happening. So I'm assembling cots, and we decided we're going to put the women and children on one room that were under a certain age so they could be together. So there was all this consideration taken into it. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, like that, like we about killed ourselves trying to maintain their values and things. There was one boy I know now that he was probably sent like a informant, so to speak, because he was like 16 and he was like, I'm going to stay in that room with the women and kids. And we said, no, you're not. You're like 16. We didn't know how old he was. We're like, you're way too old to be in there with women and kids. We think, who's your mom? She's not here. Well, you're not staying with it. You're not going in there. So he got put into his own room with a cot and stuff. And we had, there's like a male guard or something that we had sit outside his room because he kept being like, I'm going in there. And we're like, no, you're not. We potentially have victims and other things in this room and you're not going in there. So these were all babies, like toddlers and young children.
So after the first day of you going in, about how many like women and children would you say that you ended up pulling from the ranch that first initial day?
I want to say it's like 20 or so, 25. And then you've got these women that came with them. So then you're adding in, at that point, you're like at 40. Because then they figured out that the mothers could go with them.
Okay.
Which was fine. We were like, come, like, please. Come. We don't want to take care of all your children. So like, not to sound mean, but like,
no, seriously. Yeah. You're like, that's not our job. Like, we want to make sure children are safe, and then we want to let you be their parents, right?
Yeah, like parent them and be there, you know?
In some of the documentaries, I believe it was the Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, it showed footage of what it seemed like a child being ripped away from his mom's arms, basically. The child screaming and kicking and the mom sobbing. Is that something that you saw, or is that kind of taken out of context?
So this is the part where I say that I kind of went AWOL. So we get... There's so much buildup between that question and what happened.
We can go back if you want and get to this question later.
I didn't know if that was happening during the time that these 50 women and kids were taken to the warehouse. I wasn't sure if that was around the same time or if that came later.
It came later, and it did happen. But those women were offered the opportunity. They said at this point they'd found abuse and neglect findings against either the father or the mothers in the situation. And so they had told them, that's what I said, it's like jumping kind of like really far. But so they tell them, okay, look, we'll take you to domestic violence shelter. We'll take you to a sex trafficking shelter. You just take you and your kids go. We'll take you. We'll take you. You don't have to worry about it. We'll take you. And so there's women that refuse that. So, and this is common even outside of like, you know, any of these religions or anything like that. Like women don't want to leave their husbands. They choose the husbands over the kids. They do it all the time.
Really?
And it's same for the men. They will choose the women. Actually, I would say the men tend to like boot the woman more than the woman will boot the man. Come to think of it, I would say that if I tell a guy like, hey, like you need to, if she's beating on you, you need to leave with your kids. He'll be like, okay. Like, yeah, maybe because I don't know. But women, I've removed so many children because women will not leave their husbands. Like it's crazy. So it's not just limited to them. You know, I wouldn't say that at all. I remove more kids in the community for that than I have in dealing with the FLDS. But so anyway, they were offered that, and some women said no, and that's when the removal started happening in that fashion.
Right.
So they had the option to leave with the children, and they were choosing not to go.
That's good to know. That's a perspective. That's a perspective that you wouldn't ever knew happened if you just watched the documentary. That the women could have gone with their children. That makes all the difference in the world, I think.
It does.
Yes.
And so I left because doing one removal is hard. Okay, like you're crying, like it's hard. And I was not prepared to do 50 removals and like snatch them out of the crying mother's arms. Like, I mean, it needed to be done, and I couldn't do it anymore. I had already been there for a couple weeks at this point. I had already reached like critical mass, and I was like, I can't. Like, you know, you go to a mom who's like, no, and you're taking the kid doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to let go. It's horrible.
I can't imagine.
So it's just so when they were like, yeah, we're gonna do removals tomorrow, I was like, I'm gonna head back to the office. And they were like, did anyone give you permission to go? And I was like, no. I was like, I can't take anymore.